I guess. Yeah. So that's done. I'll make a brief point about this later as well, but this is not something we're going to be sharing outside of this group or outside the four walls of HIX, so don't worry about that at all. But with that in mind, we can move forward. I'll keep my introduction fairly brief here in the interest of getting on with today's agenda. But first of all, I want to obviously provide a special thanks to Eloise for joining us. Early days as well in San Francisco, but it's wonderful to have you with us. And of course, she will be talking around the topic of supplier experiences there. It is a topic Eloise is very passionate about. And I, for one, could not miss her comment that was made on the last week ProcureTech webcast. Adam, I saw you there as well. You did a great job, by the way. So well done, excellent content. But one thing that bit with me on what you said, Louise, was 2022 has to be the year we start taking supplier experiences seriously. And today you will all hear how she thinks that can unfold and why she will be producing much more content on this topic moving forward into this year as well. Now, Eloise has clearly had a lot of traction with her latest with her predictions overall around the future of procurement, I would say. And if you haven't had a chance to grab hold of her latest book, my guess would be at least half of you have this. Doing a bit of promotion for you here, Eloise. Was it 5,000 copies you have, shared?
Not quite that many, but quite a few.
Very, very good. And I can also, I hope I'm not revealing anything I shouldn't here, Eloise, but you did obviously share with me you're working on a new book as well, which you are with the working title something around footprints of the future, where you are interviewing lots of different people to get a little bit more practical view on successful new era, I would say, procurement digitalization projects and transformation. So we're looking forward to starting to dive into that body of content and as we make it available. Now, Eloise is not just here to present to us on her thoughts on supplier experience management, but she will join the discussion afterwards. In fact, I've asked Eloise to be my co-pilot, my co-chair for the meeting. So, be prepared for her posting perhaps some questions of provocative and challenge nature in familiar Eloise style. Second of all, obviously, I want to thank you for investing time and attention in the next 90 minutes. And also hope we can see you in future sessions as well. We have outlined some agenda ideas for future kind of, sessions on different type of topics. But I really hope we can maybe collaborate on what the content, the format for these sessions could be. And I hope you will share what your thoughts could be on that. I will be reaching out more individually on that point. Now, I think most of you are aware who I am, and I won't introduce myself much further, but in addition to leading commercial activities there at HIX, I will be acting as chair for these SXM meetings. With me, I have our CEO and founder, Kostas Sullianis. I have our Chief Customer Success Officer, Jens Ilschner. And I also have our product marketing lead, Duncan Clark, who will be acting more as a note taker, which kind of takes me to a few final points. Now, we do obviously see value in documenting some of the stuff that comes out of these sessions, but I want to make sure we will not assign anything of what you say to your name. This is supposed to be a fully confidential type of space for you to share, learn, and interact with each other. And I'll make a final point as well. If you ever feel that this sessions turn into a HIX promotion marketing type of activity, I sincerely would say we have miserably failed with the objectives there. Our intent is to focus on the supplier and how we can start improving how we engage with what I would say is a dearly underserved stakeholder of the enterprise. And I also hope that this group could start collaborate on how we drive the change in mindset in organization, in the tools and the processes that we use to transform supplier engagement at all levels across our organization. And also I wanted to say finally here, there will be plenty of solutions out there that can provide and move the needle on supplier experience. There will be different ways to skin that cat and solution for this. And again, you know, we obviously have a solution here at HIX, which we're furthering developing, but we also hope that we will start seeing more and more solutions that are focusing on the objective of improving supplier experiences. And perhaps even that this ecosystem, you know, in collaboration with practitioners like yourselves, can start, you know, building some sort of a movement which will benefit the supplier, and that this perhaps start becoming a bit of a shared objective of this group. So with that, I will hand you over to Eloise, who will be speaking for the next roughly 25-ish type of minutes before we move into Q&A and a bit more of a generalized discussion. For those who know my style, at least, I'm unafraid of asking direct questions. So prepare yourself potentially for that. And I know Eloise will have some questions as well for the group. If you have any comments, any questions, obviously you can use this chat group. I will be monitoring that. You can raise your hand, but honestly, I think we can also, you know, just break in and ask the question as well.
Great.
Right.
Thank you. Can you make me a host, by the way, or so I can share my screen? And while you do that, so thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here, even though it's wildly early. So my next book is going to be, I am already working, you can see my whiteboard here on my next book, which was supposed to come out in Q2. It's not going to come out in Q2, but my premise for my next book is that the 21st century supply chain needs to be secure, transparent, digital, green, and flexible. And while any idiot consultant could say that, what I think is unique and the angle that I'm going to take on that is when we think about end-to-end supply chain and the sort of future of this 21st century supply chain, it's all consists of predominantly third parties. And that's, I think, a key piece that we miss. And so I'm really focused on this idea of third-party management, which is in most cases supplier management, and how do we engage with our suppliers, and how do we elevate them and essentially manage them. So when Ragnar came to me last year with this topic, I'm like, oh yes, please, this is exactly right, what I want to talk a bit about. And part of the reason why we have to get supplier experience management right is because, and I'll take my machine here a second to kick over. We have to get it right because when we talk about security of our supply base and making it green and all the other sort of words there, it actually that comes through the attention that we give to our suppliers, and because your biggest risks come from your supply base. It's not from your internal folks, it's from your supply base, and we often miss that. So with that, so I'm going to talk where we are today, how do we build SXM, which includes the definition, and then where are we going. So I did not come up with the quote, but somebody, I was at the Procure Tech session a few weeks ago, or I guess it was just last week, supposedly 2022 is year of supplier. And I don't know who submitted that, but I was just asked to speak about that. And I think to some degree that is, I agree with it. I like that. I think we're finally getting there that, and I hear this all the time. Every company wants to be the customer of choice. We're moving away from total cost to total value, and regulations are ever increasing, and the scrutiny from governmental bodies, whether they be regional or global. So I think this is inevitable that we have to really leverage our supply base to help us, especially as the way we've designed our very complicated supply chains and how much they rely on third parties. So we're all excited about this future, and yet the past is less than stellar, because what we have is very poor interactions with our supply base. And Gartner calls it the quote portal fatigue, which I think is actually a very nice description. And why do we have this portal fatigue? It's because we've been sold. I'm gonna drag source to pay providers and I'm gonna start early on that today. Is they come in and they sell you in some version of, hey, we have a supplier portal that centralizes and collects your information of all your suppliers. And that's great when they're selling to you, but then they're selling to everybody on this call, and then everybody in the Fortune 100 and 500. And then if we put ourselves in the supplier's perspective, we now have to go to all these different portals and keep our information up to date. And within each quote unquote portal, we have different apps that we connect out to, or that may not even be connected, and that are just links to different systems. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. The content, if you if you go to the content, and I do go to the supplier website and check the content, a lot of it's out of date. It can be back as old as 2015. It's often one directional. It's maybe the CPO to video and a bunch of announcements. And that's not really engagement with your suppliers. That's just checking the box. And so if you're a supplier, if I go create Eloise's data science company here in Silicon Valley, and I want to do work with all of you, I have to go register with all these, with all your different portals. And that's just a concept that is so archaic and not working for us, and is making us insecure. And at the same time, we also have initiative fatigue, because all of a sudden we have a new risk profile, or a new risk threat vector. And so we have to append our profile. We get the 100-question surveys. And I love when we as Kearney are invited to onboard and to do these risk assessments. And because I'm always sort of having this metacognitive moment of, oh, I'm absolutely going to use this in a future presentation and show this as a bad example of IT risk management. And that's going to be one of the examples in my book, because self-attestation on risk, and you'll see this in the next bullet there, is I may not even understand what I'm responding to. So how can we really, this is quite literally a check the box activity. And so with risk management and ESG, oftentimes we're just bombarding suppliers with all of these requests for information and essentially surveys, without a lot of thought about where the real risk is, where the real sustainability information is that we need, where the real diversity information. And then on top of all of that, we ask them, of course, to suppliers to submit their capabilities, to do crowdsourcing and innovation events, and on and on and on. So if I'm sitting here as a supplier, I'm completely overwhelmed and inundated. And even bigger suppliers, there can just be a steady stream of formalized initiatives. And then there's also the informal ones that come in and say, hey, can you come talk to us about this? Or can you come help us think about this problem? So when we think about this, this is suboptimal ways of interacting with our suppliers. So how do we build SXM, or supplier experience management? And really, let's start with what it is. As a supplier, my motivation is to get paid for the business that I'm contracted for, and to get more business. That's, if we break it down, that's what we're trying to do. And so our job is to provide a delightful, I like very clear definitions, easy way to interact, for our suppliers to interact with our procurement systems. That's what it is. Now, there's lots of details within that, and I'm not going to go through all of these here. But but I think that each one, we have to account for each one of these in how our suppliers engage with us. And that's what this means. And oftentimes that means taking the burden off the supplier. And so I'll talk about the network effect of a supplier record. Why should I go fill my contact information and my banking information at 10 or 20 or 50 different portals? There should be one. There should be a LinkedIn for my supplier profile. And so that's what I'm really looking for in this supplier network or the data foundation that I talk about. And all of the stuff on the right, all these bullet points, which you can certainly go through offline, all of these translate into a very funny use case, or a very sort of simple but illuminating use case. Have you or any of your team ever gone into your systems as a supplier, and what was that experience? Because that can be quite illuminating, and you realize very quickly how limiting your systems can be. I'm not saying everybody on this Zoom has bad systems, but I would also challenge you to look and go think and actually assess that, because this is one of the gaps in our collective designs. And if you think about source to pay providers, they came about serving procurement and supporting procurement service to the business. So suppliers have always been an afterthought in all system design. Now that's obviously changed in the last few years, but the source to pay providers are still working on this old construct. So your takeaway from today is to go log into your systems and figure out how painful it's for your suppliers to do business with you. Now, that's not what I wanted there. Okay. All right. So I had an extra slide. That's what you get for working in the middle of the night. So to help us figure out how to design these systems, one of the first things we need to do is segment our suppliers. Now we have these fancy value, growth, essential, transact. Those are just fancy terms for tier 1, tier 2, and tail spend and all that. But you can see the definitions. And when we do this, this allows us to be more precise in the types of systems and more importantly, the system access and the user management or the supplier management aspect to the applications that we give them. And so it's important. I'm sure most of you have your supplier segmented, but you also now have to carry that through into your systems design, not just a singular supplier portal, but apply this to your system, to your supplier engagement systems, because that will also affect how we communicate with them. And communication activities like communication and relationship building are directly tied to the systems that you have. Just a sidebar on this, because I think it's important. Again, this is just a little, again, sidebar on segmentation. But I threw this slide in here because 1% of your suppliers should be your value growth, and because they represent your biggest risk and your biggest strategic potential. And 19% are your sort of essential suppliers. And so you can see the bubbles, that those are the activities that you're going to be doing with them, improve them, sustain them, and cultivate. And then your sort of, ones that are sort of transactional, much more transactional, you're not going to do a lot with them. And the reason I put this slide in here is to remind us that this is as we think about systems design and the types of systems and the type of capabilities, that's why trying to get that out. As we think about the systems capabilities, we need to put it in the context of what we're doing with the suppliers. So if you're for your value and growth suppliers, you want to develop relationships and you want to do the more sophisticated SRM that looks a lot more like CRM on the commercial side. Whereas for your tail suppliers or ones that are sort of just transactional in nature, you don't really care about that. And so these bubbles, whatever your bubbles are, and the actions you take with them need to be incorporated into your design. So, and so that's kind of our supplier archetypes. And then we need to build journey maps. And what does it look like? And mapping this out from, what are our systems and where are we hitting our systems and what are we doing with the systems? And so, and what does that look like? And this can be, I have not seen a lot of journey maps for suppliers. And this is a very important piece. Because this is, before you deploy any system, before you choose any system, you really have to think about who are my suppliers. Again, we have those tiers and then, or those segments, and how are they hitting the systems? And so I would encourage you to spin up a team. Don't hire consultants to do this, just do it with, folks, but really come up with some, imagine how you want your suppliers to access your systems, which will then allow us to actually design and build the systems. Now, a few good practices. I use good practices because practices change. And so when people say best practice, I roll my eyes because I don't think you can have a best practice. You can have good practices and guiding principles, but they change and they're different for every organization. So here's a few concepts. Again, the goal here, as you can see, is to avoid confusing the supplier. You want to make it easy for them. So if they come to your corporate website, is it easy to find where suppliers go and where that portal is, especially for suppliers that have never worked with you before. So easy to use, clear to find the information. And what I like about this one, if you can look closely, is you see our payment process. Again, as a supplier, I care about getting paid. So I think they've done a nice job on this one. Central access. And by the way, I just went to random supplier portals. This was actually for a project, but and we went through and the team went through and took screenshots from different portals, because remember, your supplier portals are public and anybody can come to them, which is both a security issue and a visibility issue or a branding issue. What about the P&G supplier is good in that they have this clarity of the different places you can go. But I'm going to come back to this one. I'm going to ask you to hold this one in your at the end. I'm going to as I get to the end. I want you to think about this one, because what I don't like about this one is that you have 14 different apps that a supplier needs to go to. And so I might be punching out into 14 different systems, which I actually think is the old paradigm. But at least for many folks, just at least having clarity on what the different systems are. Keeping it up to date. 2020 is not so bad. Keeping your content up to date. I found, like I said, 2015 content, and it's just embarrassing when I bring it back to a client and show them the groans and the expressions, the pained expressions are palpable. So really go through and make sure you don't have something from 2020 or 2015 or even earlier. And then you also want to make them visually appealing. And L'Oreal has some really interesting, especially mobile, and you'll notice mobile-friendly site out there. So again, the good news is you can go out there and look at this. But the bad news is if you just rely on your quote-unquote source-to-pay providers portal, you're not going to get this kind of, you're not going to get these concepts or these practices, and you're certainly not going to push the boundary. And that's what we need as we go forward into the future. And related to that is, how do we communicate? And how do we communicate with suppliers? And And what is it that, where are we going? Are we just doing single directional emails? Are we just posting announcements on the portal? Or are we creating these innovation hubs? How are we communicating our diversity, our supplier diversity initiatives? Are we just creating documents that nobody reads? Do we have dedicated channels for them? Are we doing two-way communication? And that's, again, if you go back to our source to pay portals, historically, we're not doing two-way communication. And in this social media digital revolution, we should be doing all kinds of two-way communication with our suppliers. And we should be doing multiple multimodal ways of engaging. So videos, doesn't have to be TikTok, but really compelling content for our suppliers, because I'm doing work with, I have a presentation with us with a large aerospace contract on Friday, and I wanted to understand what they do. And so I went and watched all their videos, and they were just dreadful. So I did that last night. And so that was, so really think about, again, and this how are you presenting your company? And oftentimes this means working with marketing, your branding folks, to really make your suppliers work on behalf of your brand. And then of course, there's a whole bunch of supplier communities that have popped up. So, and then as we think about, and again, you can see across the top, the different supplier segments, how do we think about each of these channels? This is not exhaustive, but this is just an idea of how are you trying to communicate with your suppliers? Because this influences how we design our systems. It's not just email blasts when there's an issue. And are we tracking when we send out emails to how many suppliers open the email that we sent? Are we doing these sophisticated marketing techniques? Are we tracking click-throughs when we send an email? Are we, again, getting into this collaboration? Are we doing all of these pieces, or are we just simply sending out RFPs, RFQs, or the dreaded 100-question surveys for risk management? So again, this is why you can start to see how the supplier segments or our supplier tiering is tied back to the types of communication we do, which is tied back to the types of systems that we use. And then, so any questions before I talk about where we're going? I realize I'm going a little fast, but I want to be mindful of the time.
I would have one, Eloise.
Yeah.
The segmentation of suppliers was very interesting, definitely a step to which needs to be done. Do you also differentiate between direct supplier and indirect material suppliers?
Yes, yes and no, and it depends on the industry, of course. Certainly when in your industry, you have direct materials much more so, but increasingly, I think that line gets blurred because as you have, well, maybe not in your industry as much, but as you say, so if you have a healthcare company that does a lot of pharma manufacturing, but then you start getting into med devices, well, medical devices, then you have to worry about, you need digital providers that are actually writing code and putting apps onto your medical devices. So your digital providers that might be historically indirect actually become direct, or elements like facilities management in the midst of a pandemic become much more strategic than simply the company that cleans the office, the corporate headquarters at the end of the day. So in general, we do, obviously your direct suppliers are going to be much more strategic and in that tier one, but they also can be, if they're just doing commodities and they are sort of interchangeable, they can be less strategic. I'm not sure that was clear. But
I think the nuance for me is that when I look at your definition of the different types, in that for value category, how I would be holding that, particularly for the FMCG or pharmaceutical space, is that the user journey for a direct versus like a big marketing agency is actually very different. So when you put up the P&G site, for example, there's things like collaborating with suppliers on specs. Not going to do that with some of our most important indirect suppliers. So I think that it's kind of looking at the nuances within the segment of the value, because I think there are nuances between groups. The other one for us is things like, you know, where would I put something like an agricultural farmer, which we're currently treating like a supplier, but, you know, in a market like Mexico, some of the farmers, not only are they speaking Spanish, some of them aren't literate. So I think how we're looking at our segments and how we're looking at the user journey for the supplier, it's also like slightly different cut on some of the definitions you put up. It's about some of those sort of clusters of like 250,000 smallholder farmers, or that have nuanced or different kind of user journey needs.
Right, and this is, yes, so the two really good points, actually. You don't have to stick to these groups. You actually might have many more segments. What I'm trying to get you to do is exactly what you just did, is think about your different segments, because you have different language requirements and we have different literacy capabilities as we move in different areas of the world. But historically, we have not accounted for that. So what you just said is exactly the point I'm trying to drive at. I want you to come up with your, you all have your own segments, and I want you to actually push even further, because the deeper you go, the more you're going to find the farmers in LATAM or wherever. And because your tooling, the reason I'm pushing you there is because your tooling is actually going to be reflective of that, instead of just one big what's the word I'm looking, just one size fits all supplier portal. And that's what I'm going at. And then back, oh, go ahead.
This Sharon, I just want to add one thing, what you mentioned about regional. That's very critical, I think, before you even do the business grouping. With our recent project, what we did, we realized that regionally reaching is a different way when you reach different regions. The communication may mean something different for each region. So before even you do the business-wise segmentation, the regional plays a bigger role. That's what we felt from our recent experience. Yes,
and absolutely. And this is the discussion that we have not had. This is the discussion we just deploy. This is exactly the point. We just passively deploy supplier portals without this kind of debate. Because, and Lauren, I think your point was about you might have different paths and different systems for different sets of suppliers, and different engagement. And this is exactly what I'm trying to drive at. And so you need underlying systems that can deal with this intelligence. And very much like your buyers, we've done a lot of work on buyers that, you know, on direct materials, we integrate much more so into the ERP system, and that's all kind of closed loop. And then we get to indirect, and our marketing and our IT providers kind of go through this channel, and we have this channel for temp labor and travel and all this other stuff. And we haven't done that on the supply side. And that's the point, that we really need to do that and set these different journey maps. And yeah, I'll make a different one later, but yeah, that's correct. Any other questions?
One question on my end. You could easily see yourself a situation where you over segment, and that causes perhaps complexity that may be unmanageable. What are the key kind of, what is too little and what is too much?
Well, I think it's you can always in one project with a healthcare company, interestingly enough, we started doing the segmentation and ended up with so many, like it was like 16 archetypes, which is way too many. So we had to roll it back and scale it back. But even if you move beyond just one, because on all those examples I pulled, those screenshots I pulled, I'm pretty sure that they were all one size fits all. So if we've moved from 1 to 4 or 1 to 8, we've done a much better job, or even 1 to 6, you know, split the difference. we're starting to get much more nuanced. And I don't know who said it, but this regional distinction is also important because that's oftentimes gets missed, especially in these emerging economies.
Yeah, and just a point from myself, you know, Lenovo has been on a bit of a journey with it, and I was on a call last week with Hacker Group where they said, what are the challenges that everyone felt on that call was going to restrict digital transformation in the next year? Was it resources, funding, etc.? And it was just what everyone said was there's just so much transformation happening, and it may be overcommitment. And I think it really aligns with what you're saying today, is that there's so much for our suppliers going on. And we made the mistake, you know, 2 or 3 years ago where I remember we tried to hold training sessions with our suppliers, and we've got 40, 50,000 suppliers. And
Yep.
per region, on average, I think 5 or 6 turned up because they're just so busy, you know. And so I think looking at our corporate website, doing what you're suggesting, and then really looking at it from the eyes of the supplier, really great advice.
Thank you. Yeah, and if I have to train, and I'm stealing a little bit of Adam's, but if I have to train, the supplier, then I'm not deploying a digital system. I'm employing an older system. I don't have to be trained. I mean, this is cliche now, right? I don't have to be trained to use an iPhone or Amazon or whatever. So it means our systems, and actually, Ragnar, to your point, one of the reasons we can do more segments like 6 or 8 is because we're putting the burden on the technology. We are leveraging this 21st century technology, this intelligence that you know, and whatever buzzword you want to put in there. When we actually leverage that, or when the vendors leverage that, then they are taking the lift away from us as the buyer and us as the supplier. So that's why I actually spend a lot of time with these innovative companies like Hicks and everybody else, and really push into to use this technology for that very reason. And so because nobody's gonna, I'm glad you said that. I'm sorry nobody attended, or 5 people attended, but nobody's gonna do that. And so I saw Adam, you raised your hand. Oh, we got 2 hands raised. I missed Laura, was it you or Laura, Adam? We'll go to Laura first and then Adam. You're on mute.
Okay, just does it mean, Luis, that when we're configuring these platforms and these full systems, if we want to be sure that the journey that the supplier journey that we're defining correctly, because the specification is key, does it mean that we have to have these strategic suppliers involved in this phase so we can be sure that we're not missing some part of the picture? So I imagine that this should be key in order not only to have our own company vision of how they are interacting with us, but as well take into consideration how they are, the issues they are facing, to be sure that at the end, when we're deploying, it's adopted by all alone by itself. Do we need to involve suppliers? Yeah,
absolutely. You should absolutely involve suppliers. And to the first question, you know, a few minutes ago, like for your strategic direct, your direct materials, like you have to do much more collaboration, especially as you're thinking about source material and you know, inbound to ensure that you have the amount. And so you're going to do much more invasive, and for your contract manufacturers, you might actually have connectivity to their manufacturing systems. So we might actually, it gets very complicated as you get to these very strategic suppliers. So yes, and involving them, especially for those, you need to involve them. It can't be, hey, we designed this with a bunch of consultants in a room and now we're deploying it. Actually, you want to make it work for them. And that's how you do this strategic engagement. So how you become that customer of choice because you're actually working with them. All right, Adam, you're up.
Hi, Eloise. Yeah, just a quick one. I've got kind of three things. One's a comment, one's an observation, and then one's a question back to you. So the to start with the comment, I loved it earlier when you said you need to look at things through the eyes of the supplier and who has actually used these systems. I've used them at BT. Wasn't pleasant because they were designed, and here's a great one for you. It's from one of the generals over in the US. Strategic narcissism is what we're all guilty of. Really what we want is strategic empathy. Don't look at things about how they relate to you. Look at it through the eyes of the supplier. Exactly that. That's the comment. The observation is with these tools and training suppliers to use the tools. It was about 14 years ago, wasn't it? It was in mid-2007. Consumer grade stuff suddenly burst onto the market, and you all know what happened in the summer 2007. I hope you do. iPhone launch, yeah. So we suddenly all became the this consumer grade interaction with applications. The world changed forever, and it was no longer driven by the cutting edge of user interfaces being business software. That's not the case anymore. So we need to look to solutions which are that consumer grade. So you don't need any training. If we need to train people to register their own details on a system, well, the system's wrong. You're asking the wrong question. You're asking suppliers things they know the answer to. What's your name? What's your address? What's your bank detail? It's not complicated. And then the last one is a question back to you, Eloise. You put up a couple of slides ago, which I think it was a P&G portal. Bunch of systems, bunch of icons there that the supplier is expected to interact with. On the procurement side of things, on the sourcing side, we talk about the best of breed and deploy an ecosystem of best of breed solutions. Are we going to end up with an ecosystem of best of breed solutions for the suppliers to use, which are then all different? And that's the question, is where do you see that side of it going?
Well, that's actually, I'm glad you teed that up. That's where we're going next. So let me go there, and then we can continue the conversation. Oops. So this is my infamous, let's go back. This is my infamous spider chart. I mean, it wouldn't be a presentation if I didn't show this. But I actually think that, I actually know that we are going to have many plugins into our supplier system. So there will be a view of this, spider art for supplier. And actually, I'll just go ahead one screen. If you can look, so the piece that for those that don't know, the spider chart is just the procurement value chain deconstructed. And so all the labels are all the capabilities that we need, and it's always growing and it's ever growing. And so what I've done to help people do roadmaps is broken them out into a heat map. Now, this is different for everybody, and these are the capabilities that you need. And this too is growing. And so I highlighted supplier management because, to Adam, to your question, these are the different capabilities that you need. Now, whether one provider or 2 or 6 or 20, that will evolve over time, because there's a lot of innovation in this space. And this is one of the areas that I'm tracking very closely, because I think it's super important to all of these objectives that I've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. And there are undoubtedly, this is going to double in the amount of capabilities. And so I'll just go back one slide. This is all enabled by having this centralized platform. And and you can see that there are a number of folks trying to be in this middle place. And this is not an advertisement for Hicks. This is actually empirically my view on Hicks, outside in, is from a supplier point of view, they are doing this integration of it's that P&G screen. What I don't like about that P&G screen is you're going into 14 different apps. And Hicks is the first company that I've seen that is starting to smooth that all out and actually use intelligence to either make the departure point or bring that information in and do that. And so so I think, and what they're doing is also adding the supplier golden record, because or being that LinkedIn for supplier information. And so when you pair that, this is exactly why they're holding that line. And by the way, I published this last year, so that was not in advance of this. But you can see they're on that line between the App Store and the Data Foundation, because what they're doing is they're bringing that supplier experience together, and there's more work to do, and there's and especially as we think about these different segments and connecting with communication systems and all the other stuff. But this is where we need to continue to go, and Adam teed this up very nicely, so thank you. Is that we need this ability to have the platform that allows us to plug in additional capabilities. So again, CRM for suppliers, however you want to, social interaction, updating our content, putting our branding on it, for direct suppliers, having the collaboration systems, the PO collaboration systems. We can do adjustments of our inbound and outbound supply, so we can tie into, as I was using the example, into our contract manufacturers and get that information pulled back. Those are complicated tools, and we don't want to be sending suppliers to 15 different tools. We want to bring that into a platform. So much like we have on the buy side, we have a supplier side view on that as well.
I think the thing I like about this lens is I like the language microservices. So we have a lot of challenge in that, we have enterprise architecture or solution architecture come in and sort of do assessments, but the reality is when you unpick a number of those providers, they're providing more than just a tech platform. They might be providing access to advisory services, or we might be outsourcing part of our own activity set. Like Candex might be a good example. We're essentially potentially outsourcing risk screening. So I think that's where we struggle a little bit to typically people go, okay, let's map it. Let's do an architectural assessment. Let's read Forrester, Gartner, whatever. But assessing the value that comes with those services or advisory behind it, particularly around ESG and those areas, I think could be a challenge as we make these big decisions on who we use and how we construct our architecture.
Yeah, and that's where the journey map and the segmentation come in, because that's all that matters, is who are the different suppliers, because there's your IT supplier is different from your direct material supplier, as was mentioned earlier, and yet at the same time so we need these different archetypes, and we also need to define what it is we're doing with them, and this is why I get very precise in the capabilities that we need. So I like, Candex, again, good example, passing off onboarding to Candex is a functional, that's what the business is trying to do. And then we can tell the architects, or we can actually journey map that if I'm using Candex, I'm a supplier, I'm a transactional low volume supplier. So that's my archetype. And I'm going to go into Candex, enter in all my information, and do the risk assessment. They're going to enrich my record with whatever else, and then I'm good to go. That's like a 3-step process. There's one solution. And now Candex, you might actually have a connection back into your internal systems, a data feed. But aside from that, that's your journey map for that one. And that's very clear and very focused on the business, and all those advisory services, that garbage just creates complexity, and you end up architecting something that's wildly off the mark. Then just because I can't help myself, this is why I think Gartner and Forrester perpetuate this, and they're actually probably our biggest part of they push us into the wrong direction. And this is they're probably the biggest targets, even though it seems like big S2P is my villain, but actually I think Gartner and Forrester do more to perpetuate the old paradigm than anything.
What's wrong? What's going on here, Louise? Because this is puzzling to me. Because we see now big tier consultancies, they are definitely broadening up their implementation services to start partnering with a lot of these type of solutions. You know, I've spoken to 4 partners in the top 6 over the last month, and they're all gearing up for this. You don't see a lot of evidence in that. Excuse for being negative here, but you know, with the Gartners and the Forresters and the Hackett's, you know, what's the problem they have?
Well, you don't see a lot of evidence of what? I missed that part.
Well, you would expect the analysts to be the leading thinkers around this, but in fact, you probably see they're being the biggest laggers from my perspective at the moment.
Right. Well, they've structured their entire business model on collecting money for doing evaluations on the status quo. Mm-hmm. And so the big thing for them is to plot whoever's, you know, moving on the wave or in the magic quadrant, who's moving. Well, if the entire the intellectual framework that you're plotting is based on is wrong, then you have a fundamental business problem, because you can't keep selling that. And so they've super slow. And I don't, you know, they keep perpetuating the past, and they just keep leveraging their names. And because nobody wants, no CIO gets fired for hiring IBM, and no head of procurement or head of supply chain gets fired for choosing SAP, but neither of those make you successful. IBM or SAP does not implicitly mean your success, just means you don't get fired. And so, or at least overtly fired. And so I think it's a similar thing. It's easy to go to Gartner and say, well, you know, Gartner said this. Gartner, I mean, I go into failed S2P implementations, and they said, you know, they point to, well, Gartner said, you know, such and such was the leader, so we chose them. And that's like, I hear that way more than I should. And so, like, how is that okay? Like, that's just not, that's not doing your job. Your job is to actually challenge this. And if you rely on Gartner and them, and they're you know, they're clearly not evolved. They have not evolved. In fact, part of the problem, and I talk to startups all the time, especially new ones and innovative ones that are sort of kind of just emerging and coming out of seed funding stages, like they can't even begin to talk to Gartner. I was talking to one yesterday, and Gartner doesn't even know how to classify them much. And then of course they're going to charge them millions of dollars, you know, up to thousands of dollars just to be evaluated. It's just, it's a bad business model. Sorry,
that's a critical thing, Eloise, is how to classify it. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, yeah, to go to Gartner and say, what's the best procurement system? You do that, it's going to get translated as what's the best end-to-end procurement system. So choose one. Of the big end-to-end ones, there's only what, 2, 3 big end-to-end systems. So it's going to be Ariba. Yeah. So, it's the definition of the question. Do you want that, or do you want an ecosystem? What is it that you're actually wanting? And then to get around and classify and research and analyze all of these is more time than is ever going to be possible.
Yeah.
I had recently an exchange with an expert from Gartner to get their view on the supplier portal. And I had the idea that they didn't get what we're heading to. So they couldn't put it in their quadrant, and with that they kind of, they were on a different planet kind of. So I share your view on that one. confirms
no,
what I experienced.
Yeah, and yeah, and actually, Carmen, I was talking to the company I was talking to yesterday, was one that you're familiar with in the chemical space, and that they're.
I know
oh,
which one you mean, yeah.
Yeah, and the camera stopped here. But yeah, exactly, and so. And they're so the only way they get around that is by creating that list of cool vendors, and that's not going to get it done. And what I mean, and I'm always talking about BT, but I think what Cyril and Adam do is they've changed the paradigm, especially Cyril, in that he's a CPO and he meets these startups. And when we start bridging the CPO to the founders of the startups, that changes the paradigm, because then all of a sudden you realize how bad Gartner and Forrester are, because it's like, so, like you're talking, Carmen, you're talking to, that the founder of that company, and all of a sudden you realize, wait, I don't see them anywhere in Gartner. And also, yeah, so it's, what I try to encourage is the CPO founder connection. Also, because as I write about, is middle managers will screw this up too. Your middle managers will, they'll get in the middle, they'll sometimes sandbag the message or change the message to meet their objectives, not to meet your objectives. So.
And I think Adam's hit the nail on the head with, I think, complacency around, the question, are people looking for an end-to-end solution, or are they looking for an ecosystem? And that really brings a lot of complacency, not just with the consultants, but also with companies like SAP. They say, yeah, we've got a great end-to-end solution. But when you really dig into asking the questions, I ran them over the coals pretty hard, with the vendor management aspect of their end-to-end capabilities, because it wasn't great. And, and I think they get to that size where they just go off branding more than capabilities.
Well, exactly. And here's the thing, I've just spent the last 2.5, 3 years implementing this. So I think I'm sort of in Ariba, that is. So SAP Ariba, I've done that. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, building an ecosystem. And here's the thing, even the Ariba stuff, it's not integrated. So you kind of buy Ariba thinking each of the modules is integrated with each other. Yeah. It's not. So effectively, it's an ecosystem of poorly or not integrated stuff anyway.
Yeah, when I got it end to end, and I started in my role, and I called them into the office and I said, okay, we've got an Ariba end to end, why doesn't the upstream link with the downstream? And they said, well, you didn't get the third module to connect them. And I said, well, if we buy that, will it connect? And they said, no, it doesn't work anyway. And I said, okay, all right, well, we need to build, as the wording you're using, an ecosystem that can pull the data from the different points and be able to centralize it. And then that's why we've gone so heavily focused into data governance with every platform we use, so that we can have a proper ecosystem.
Right. Eloise, I see you stopped sharing here. Does that mean you've concluded, or?
Yeah, I was just going to conclude with, I was getting to the end and just say that this is the task in front of us. By the way, this is a great conversation. So I was enraptured in the conversation. But this is the challenge in front of us. And to tie it back to what I'm working on is as we think about building that green, secure, flexible, resilient supply chain, if we're not doing these activities, we're never going to build that end-to-end supply chain. Because the last thing, I am tired of reading news articles about every layperson or Tom, Dick, and Harry that now thinks they're a supply chain expert because there's a bunch of ships, off the coast of LA or outside the port or the Suez Canal. It's like, this is our job to solve this, not 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 everybody with a microphone and a camera. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Eloise. Very engaging, clearly evidenced by all the questions. And you know, there will be more questions here as we go along here, I'm sure. And maybe I'll start with you, Eloise, here, by the way. So, you know, if we keep in mind the bigger picture here around, and I even expected you having a slide on this, but you know, you gave me the idea, and something we felt for a long time is, compared to employees, compared to shareholders, compared to customers, suppliers are clearly the odd one out. They haven't been given the treatment that they deserve. I think we don't need to kind of label that any further. That seems to be very well understood. But you know, what do you see perhaps in leading edge companies that have done, you know, have been able to make that transition? What are they doing? How are they communicating the value, and how they overcome some of the barriers to become more supplier centric in their procurement transformation?
Well, I think most companies are struggling with this. I don't think you can crown a leader, and I'm not big on leaders and laggards, but I don't think there's a lot of people. There's various examples here, there, that are doing particular elements well, but I think in general, most companies are struggling. And because the problem, as we have kind of started to define the elephant this morning, it's big. And I don't think anybody, no client that I've come across, and if you've done this, good, you're in a minority, but I haven't come across a client that's doing this particularly well. And in fact, I would say even the technology to enable this has hardly existed. It's still being developed. You're developing some of it. Others are developing some of it literally as we speak. So I don't think I can't point to, you know, so-and-so and say that they're doing it well. I think some folks are on their journey, but wouldn't say that it's locked up. And I think evidence of that is you're still, again, we're going back to, you still get security breaches coming through your suppliers. You still have public relations debacles coming from your N-tier suppliers. We learned over the last 2 years that we didn't have good N-tier, you know, deep, you know, tier 4, tier 5 visibility. So I think just some of the fundamentals are missing. So I'm not sure that I can't say that anybody's actually doing it particularly well.
No, and I think we all share that view. It is an emerging topic. And to that effect, I'd love to maybe...
I think there is a question.
Oh, sorry.
Or no? Or
one question, when you start with the supplier portal, building it up, obviously you need data, but my question would be, is there one particular use case you would start with? And this discussion we also had with Hicks already. If you start implementing the supplier portal, would you start with one use case approaching all suppliers, or would you start with one segmentation of suppliers with several use cases? As in with use cases, I mean, sustainability could be one, any certificates management, P2P, whatever, onboarding, blah, blah. What is better as approach?
The most fundamental is information management. So do you have all your suppliers? Do you have all their information? And so I think that's over and above everything, because again, you need to make sure your suppliers are properly onboarded and are getting paid. And again, if you actually interview some of your suppliers, you find out even your most strategic suppliers may actually have invoices that frequently run into 120 days unpaid, and you may not see it, but that might cause them a lot of grief, and a lot of grief for, you know, accounts payable people. And so this is why, again, back to, you got to put yourself in the supplier's shoes and actually find out, like, if I have a problem with my invoice, who do I call? And are you tying up people with that? So I think that's just first full stop, you got to make sure that's working well. And even then, it's a sketchy proposition, especially when you're talking about 40 or 50,000 suppliers. So that's number one. And then I think you have to do then it becomes about setting a roadmap. And I hate to say that sort of, but I think you have to go through and define what's going to create the most value for you, because and prioritize it as such, because sustainability might be at the top of your priority list, whereas atoms, it might be fourth or fifth important, but risk for them, the risk might be 10 times more important than sustainability. So I think, and again, the archetypes, your sustainability for your tier 4 and 5 might be more important than atom cyber risk for tier 1. So because tier 1 for them might be putting software on actual devices, whereas your tier 4s might be using palm oil or something that's going to, or using a commodity that is engaging in forced labor. So I think it depends based on your industry and what your objectives are.
Okay, great.
Which I know is not a great answer, but I do think that's where you have to really put it in the supplier view.
Well, maybe to add a little bit of our opinion here, Louise, as well. I mean, we totally agree with you around you need to get control of the data. That's number one. So being able to consolidate all that data, centralize it, and then starting to set up, workflows so that you can manage the life cycle of that data. Yeah. But then from us and our experience is, then you need to start engaging the supplier with that data and starting to use that connection point, not to be too ambitious necessarily in the beginning, but start to position this as the only connection point for you and the supplier. And I wanted to pull a little bit on you, Jerry, here, by the way, to give you just a moment to breathe before I ask the question here. Certain industries, they may sometimes go a little bit more unnoticed. We have a lot of FMCG companies here today, and more visible type of organizations. Jerry works for BAE Systems, a very large, significant aerospace and defense company. And I obviously know this, that Jerry and team has been working quite a lot behind the scene in terms of the very visible procurement scene, at least, in building a lot of the concepts that we talked about here today. And I was hoping, Jerry, that maybe you can put a little bit of words around what your journey has been in your supplier engagement of the last 6, 7, 8 years, if you don't mind.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, our journey with HIX really started out with just trying to digitize our supplier onboarding process. We are a global company. We have 5 markets around the world. I am responsible for the US market. Within the US, we have 4 sectors, 10 business units, 10 different ERP systems. So we run SAP, Oracle, CostPoint, a number of ERP systems. And really all of our business units were managing suppliers and information separately. And we were really looking for a way to digitize that, centralize the data. 30% of our suppliers were common to more than one business unit. So they were, certainly registering multiple times. We had large distributors. In our process of putting our business case together, one of our suppliers would register 144 times in 1 year with BAE Systems just because of all the interactions they had. So our journey kind of started with trying to centralize and digitize those process, share forms. Once we got all of our suppliers into HIX, we then found other functions coming to us, wanting to utilize that portal. So our centralized AP team wanted suppliers to be able to look up their own invoice and payment statuses. And since we had a portal that our suppliers were coming into, they found that as a natural method for them to give suppliers access to their data. So we interfaced HIX with the AP data warehouse. Suppliers can now self look up their own invoice and payment status. That was a 5-year business case that paid off in 6 months. So suppliers now are doing somewhere around 400 to 500 lookups a week. You know, from there, we had various other functions just coming to us wanting to add purchase orders, RFQs, all our non-disclosure agreements, certificates of insurance. So that's really what's keeping us busy now, is working with all of these functions to just add those additional sets of data, so that we can reduce the number of access points that suppliers have to go to when dealing with BAE, and also make it easy for them to just access all that information in one spot. And certainly take advantage of the HIX capability to track all of that information for us, to recollect it, you know, when it expires, because quite a bit of it does. So, you know, we've got a team internal that is working right now to map the supplier journey, as Eloise had showed earlier. It's very difficult. You know, people are overworked, trying to keep them engaged. What's kind of ironic is we don't even know where suppliers have to go to deal with us, right? So we're having to learn ourselves, where are they going to get that information, because I know they're getting it. So that's what we're doing, is we're trying to, you know, map every point suppliers have to go when dealing with BAE, and trying to provide, you know, that single door into BAE with easy access and easy tools to get what they need. So we've been at that for about a year, and it's, like I said, it's kind of difficult. It's not going that well, but we're trying to progress it.
Thanks so much for that, Jerry. And then just maybe one follow-up question here. You know, I feel, at least from our perspective, we've been quite impressed with how you've been using, and sorry about the HIX commercial, that was not really the point there, you know, but how you're also using this for quite agile collaboration with suppliers as well, and how you're using this platform to communicate with them. Could you talk a little bit around that?
Yeah, you're referring to the supplier messaging capability.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually been really, really key for us. We've had, you know, incidents that have happened in the past where we've had facilities that have flooded. People can't get access to the facility to contact their suppliers to tell them to stop shipping goods because the facility is underwater and we can't take any more shipments. You know, so prior to HIX, we really struggled with that quite a bit when events like that would happen. So we rely heavily now on the HIX capability to be able to communicate to our suppliers when events like that happen. We have other, you know, a number of regulations. So being a defense contractor, we operate under a number of DoD regulations that seem to ever be growing. So when we get these new regulations, we can send those out very quickly to our supply base. So when COVID hit, there were a number of lockdown regulations across the various US states. We needed to communicate to suppliers to remind them that as a defense contractor, those lockdowns do not pertain to you. You know, so we need you to keep shipping goods and manufacturing per our requirements. End of year gift policies, reminding suppliers not to ship us, you know, send us any gifts and things like that. But, you know, we do rely on the messaging capability quite a bit when communicating with, you know, just a vast supply base. We have about 50,000 suppliers that we deal with on a regular basis. So it's been a very good tool.
And maybe to add, because I know the jury use case, but I think it shows what good data can yield, right? Because at the end of the day, the messaging, any messaging functionality, it's so simple, right? But what's really key here is you've established that data point, you have up-to-date data, it's a trusted channel with suppliers. And I think that's very powerful, by the way, that as a large multinational, you can send out a communication and have that kind of trust that you're having that engagement and suppliers are looking at it, which comes back down to your data, I believe, right? And that I think is a clear use case of value of data. When people ask for great examples, I think that is a great one, right? You can't have seamless, simple communication if it's not reaching the right people, right?
Yeah, no,
I think we're
exactly.
also seeing, I think I like the sense of the portal, and the BAA story is an interesting one. I'm seeing tremendous pull also for more and more data aggregators. So, you know, we're on a journey to expand supplier diversity outside of just North America and South Africa into multiple other markets, but obviously information linked to elements of supplier diversity tend to be very much at the government or the local country level. I don't want to go and invent my own data aggregation, pulling multiple sources together. I would rather be able to go to a common place and plug that into a portal. But I think there's multiple examples of that, ESG elements, etc. I think there's a huge growth in that kind of demand for data aggregators that we can just buy the information from.
Which clearly will help the supplier to not having to do this multiple times over with all their supply base. And I also think there will be a huge growth in these supply networks. The problem, I suppose, is, you know, trying to cover all the information in a single network.
Yeah.
I think you'll probably see more specific networks that can do one thing very, very well and validate that information, and then you plug into multiple of these networks. So.
Yeah.
That's a thing that I brought up with our supply chain, head of supply chain strategy. Was I remember 2 years ago, I was on a rotation in our HQ, and I asked him, what did he think was going to happen? Did he think that things that cloud providers wouldn't be able to keep up with the demand of aggregate, you know, data? Would it sort of go more internal development for large companies, or, you know, what was going to be happening? Because one of the challenges, like Lauren was just mentioning, is we've got increased demand on data happening, you know, on a daily basis. And how do we keep up with that? And I think that's the ongoing challenge. I've got exactly the same issues, Lauren, with supply diversity and you know, how we meet the growing demand into regions like Europe. So yeah, it's a really good point you brought up.
Great, thank you so much, Jerry. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Angus. I'm going to pick a little bit on you, Kieran, here. So brace yourself. But, you know, we've heard about Jerry, who's done, you know, some phenomenal good stuff for a number of years. And obviously, I know from our conversations, Kieran, that, you know, you at least have been an advocate for pushing for perhaps a more of a supplier-centric procurement transformation. But I know it hasn't been without challenges. And I'm sure there'll be much more broader appeal in what you're going to share here. But can you maybe talk a little bit around, you know, what are the challenges and how perhaps you know, work to come across or to overcome some of those?
No, shit, it's been great discussion so far. I mean, we're at a different stage of our journey to others on the call, and I'll start with a quote. I mean, I think we're all sort of sharing experiences working with consultants and so on. We are going through a midst of a business strategy review. We have a new CEO for, I think, the last year and a half, and a big sort of 3 to 5 year activity, and we're awash with consultants at present, trying to scope and sell, and so it's you know, it's fun and games for procurement, but we went through one stage of ERP review, and we are making decisions that, similar to many here, that we can't go for one, and we will never invest in one global ERP implementation, and quite honestly, would it be worth it? So we may end up having multiple ERPs, you know, depending on the different regional or scale of business that we support. And we went through one round of early scoping of ERP and looking at some of the, as you say, the additional capabilities needed, like source to pay. And the conversation with the consultant went like this, because there was just a big badge of Ariba sat over the middle of a page. Easiest thing to present, and I articulated that maybe that wasn't the right thing, and that I'd seen through many routes that basically, you know, there were many companies who invested far more than we had, who had multiple issues And this is an absolutely correct subject from an experiential point of view, but the same goes internally as well, quite honestly. Anyone who works in a global business, I've got, I forget how many different passwords I've got. It just kills me. But you know, we are going around building all these systems. And the point was, well, they've invested more than you. I said, I know. I mean, but ultimately, I don't want to go on the exact same journey they have. I'd like to leap ahead. And it's exactly that point as you raised, that they are pre-wired to commit for the short term, let's say next round of business they need to win for their bonuses and everything else over the longer term requirements of the business themselves. So that's where I am in my attitude. And to your point, Ragnar, where are we? So I'm trying to build relationships, because I think even broader, Eloise, than your one-page spider diagram, which is great, is ultimately, and it's been touched on here a little bit, is ultimately data platform for the business, because there are many more subjects beyond what we're doing, and we're trying to collaborate with IT at the moment around trying to align, a number of our data objects and try and really clarify things like, having a global geographic taxonomy. We've got one in procurement. Would we be happy if we shared one with somebody else? I don't care, quite honestly. Just have one standard. So there's a number of areas we start to see as we link everything together, that we realize that we can create these, let's say, related business cases. So we have a new data architect in our business who wants to present the case for a new, new sort of class leading data platform. And we're completely with them, because quite honestly, anything that steers me away from being sucked into an extended SAP Ariba implementation is always fantastic for me. And on the experiential side, I mean, I guess I've gone through 2 waves now of using design thinking principles, again on internal topics, although touching on supplier, we haven't got into the supplier space. So I would echo some of the things that were raised earlier around using sort of design thinking, stories and so on, storyboarding, and absolutely bringing your customer, whoever that customer is, going on that journey in as early as possible. I think it's absolutely right. I was looking forward to that. Unfortunately, the pause and strategy has meant I can't move forward into that stage yet. But yes, absolutely. For me now, Ragnar, it's now combining a number of data points to present the case to our business that there's no point in thinking about vendor master anymore. Vendor master's dead. I mean, it's not dead, but clearly it's something we should have tackled years ago. But ultimately, supplier information is such a broader topic that either you want to harness and do well, or you want to just die, quite honestly, because I mean, the need for data is just extending so quickly that I think our approach to risk governance in our business needs to wake up, because too much top-down subjectivity and not enough objectivity driven from data-driven information, sort of analysis, to enable you to really understand where the problems are, maybe on risk or ESG matters, or as you say, from an experiential point of view. So I think that's the whole topic for me at the moment. It's really trying to, really get to the guts of how we're establishing our ERP, our supply chain design, and everything else. Really trying to ensure that some of these concepts are carried forward. So.
Yeah, I want to actually comment on that, because I like, I do talk separately about extending the supplier record into the enterprise, because you have balance of trade considerations where your suppliers might be your customers as well. And we have it all, well, in theory, we have it all locked down in procurement, but it's not connected to the rest of the enterprise. So that's a key point. And even just within supply chain, when you have a proliferation of ERP systems, which is okay, which I think is the reality, how do we ensure that we have that one golden record for the supplier that is enriched with all the supplier network information and is continually updated and pushed into or transacted with the ERPs? Because how can we do anything in supply, the broader supply chain, if we don't have a common supplier record? And Jerry, you were talking about like the suppliers registering multiple times. I was just cringing, like, and yeah, so it's a great point.
All right, we have just a couple of minutes left here. Such an engaging conversation. Thank you so much. Clearly, we could have probably doubled the discussion time here, but with your permission, we will be planning future sessions, and that will be my final closing point here. So the initial assumption here, or the idea, is that maybe we'll make it a bit more specific next time. I have a few pretty interesting use cases that I would maybe hope to not present to you, but ask for a company to present back to you, and go a little bit more into detail around the supplier-centric transformation that they've been going through. So that is one idea. And then, we are building an SXM kind of future platform ourselves, with additional feature function and these types of things. And for a third session, the idea was that maybe we start opening up the hood for some of those kind of concepts that we're working on, and see whether there would be an interest for you to provide some commentary, to have a look. This is something our clients have asked for, because they want to make sure whatever we develop here has broad relevance. But I will reach out to each and one of you and ask for maybe some feedback on this session, and also get some ideas for topics for future sessions as well. But with that, we are out of time. Eloise, thank you so much, as always. And thank you everyone else for your time as well. And I really hope to see you again in future sessions.
Thank you for having me. It was nice to meet you all and talk to you all.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Everyone.
Thanks.